guys, to another episode of the Compliance Chronicles. Today, we're going to be discussing something that I think is really, really important, and that's just case studies. So we're going to take some time to delve into some of the most high-profile cases I think are important to go through to really understand from a compliance perspective how it's impacted not only the organization, but how it's impacted the specific industries and sectors that those case studies have arisen from, what its learnings have been, and what we can take forward. So we're going to discuss a few of those, and hopefully that'll be an episode which we can, again, take important things to bring back into our line of work, to show how industries interact with one another, and to show how we can improve what we do from looking at case studies. So
yeah, that's a good. Just to elaborate, I think take it a bit further. We haven't picked like the most standout case studies. Some of them we picked because they provide either a unique or an important learning outcome for. Like I remember reading some of them when we were discussing it. I think I need to take that on board. So they're not all necessarily the most financially impactful fines or the ones where somebody lost a license or lost a job, but they're the ones that provide probably more unique or beneficial outcomes.
Yeah, no, you're right. So we have some case studies that we've kind of just discussed off air and that we've discussed in the past. Some of them are a bit more obvious or high profile, like I said, and some of them are a bit less so, but for us, potentially provide a greater depth of insight into actually areas where compliance professionals maybe or industries have kind of maybe taken their eye off the ball or have allowed things to potentially slip and then cause a greater impact on other areas of the business. So yeah, you're right in that sense. So yeah, we'll go through them and see if that provides us with learning, provides with the audience with learning.
Important compliance or learning outcome is don't eat just before you go on a podcast. So there's a place opposite before we start the podcast where we sit down, where me and Ray have a chat, have a coffee. And he always says to me, we've got these rules that we follow before podcasts, which are, don't eat anything or drink anything that could stain, we don't ask each other questions that we want to ask in the podcast. And I made the mistake of eating, and hence why I folded up my t-shirt.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a mistake of eating. I would just say a mistake of eating the
type of sauce.
Yeah, very saucy food. Yeah.
Cool. You start off because you picked a good one, which provides good learning points.
Yeah. So I think again, just to touch on why we're doing this and kind of why looking at case studies do matter. So one of the things that I ensure that I do in terms of as a financial crime expert or somebody who provides consultancy and provides oversight when it comes to AML is always looking at case studies, always looking at enforcement action. So something I do, I've been doing it for a long time, is creating my own or company-wide enforcement tracker. So tracking the different type of enforcement, tracking the different type of case studies relevant to the sector of work I'm in, to see actually what the findings or failings were, what the impact it is on the current organisation or industry that I'm working in, the current mitigation that the company or organisation has, the firm has, and actually is there any room for improvement? Are there any gaps or any dead spots where actually that finding or that enforcement could be somewhere where the organisation may be vulnerable to? So like I said, the first thing is really important to look at case studies because it provides opportunity of learning. It provides opportunity to audit yourself in a way that sometimes internal audits don't do. So when you audit yourself as an organization internally, sometimes, again, if it's not fully independent, you will almost, as I said in the previous episode, mark your own homework to a degree. Looking at failings and findings from other case studies relevant to your sector, your industry, provides a bit more of an objective view, and it's like, okay, this is the actual failing, and therefore you have to then take stock of actually, do we have this in place to mitigate that, rather than we do, but actually the operations that you have look identical to the firm or the organization who have been fined, and it provides a bit more of an objective in audit of yourself if you take it in that way. So I think it's really important looking at case studies to provide that kind of objective view of actually where your firm sits in terms of its own compliance framework and controls.
I think also on that, and it's a really good point, is it's also for people within regulated businesses to remember that when it comes to case studies or publications of enforcement action or publications of learning, that it's everyone's responsibility. The amount of places where I've worked where it's almost become habitual or dependent that the head of compliance, the chief of compliance, whatever, will send an update, say, oh, guys, by the way, there's just been this enforcement action. Here's a summary. And you don't really get the CEOs, owners, even sometimes junior level staff who are working in AML, safer gambling, whatever it is, that will go out of their own way to read it. I'm not saying it's the case for all of them, but I do think it needs to become more common practice that as soon as there's enforcement action or a publication that you can learn from, that you take it upon yourself and don't wait for anyone to read it, because I think that's not common enough.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's like I said, I think that's another thing that providing these enforcement trackers does is it, from my perspective, it allows you to offer opportunities for others to take ownership of that assessment or that review of case studies, where actually you can say, look, this is the enforcement tracker. This is our enforcement tracker. The next one you can review. The next one that comes in, you X person or Y person, you review it. You provide an assessment of the findings. You provide an assessment actually for what we have in place. You provide assessment of actually where you think we are in terms of our controls. And again, it provides that ability for people to develop and take ownership of the work they do on a daily basis. So
yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think the first case study is a high profile one. So we will start with a high profile one. It's quite dated now in the sense it's about just coming up to 4 years now since the actual case study. The reason I wanted to discuss this because I think it's in this day and age we are in, where we are in a generation or an age with kind of multinational organizations, and international corporations and firms and companies working across multiple jurisdictions. So even if we're looking at it from an online or a gambling space or a gambling sector, many or most gambling companies or operators now will operate across multiple jurisdictions. So they'll have multiple licenses. Therefore, there are multiple regimes, and also they'll have multiple operations that may work across those markets, which may cause a bit of fragmentation. So the reason why I wanted to discuss this was just to go through that, the impact of that, and actually kind of lessons learned and kind of how we can overcome that. So the first case study was the fine that HSBC received in 2021, and that was a $2 million fine from the Department of Dubai's financial. $2 million. Sorry.
Okay.
That was, and I'll go on to that kind of. It's very small in comparison to their fine 9 years earlier.
I had a bigger fine in my head.
So, but it was this discuss kind of how it's a repeated failing.
Okay.
So the Department of Dubai Financial Services, the Dubai Financial Service Authority fined HSBC $2 million in 2021 for significant AML and CTF failings. So AML, anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing failings.
Those two words don't go hand. Find them $2 million.
Yeah.
For significant AML failings.
So and this is because they still managed to get fined in a quite loosely regulated space. So the Dubai financial services sector is quite loose in its regulation. It's quite how do we say this?
It's new.
It's a new regulation, right?
So
so it's in terms of its authority or in terms of its the level of fine it gives is quite small in comparison to a US regulator or a UK or an EU regulator. So a $2 million fine in terms of Dubai represents a really significant amount.
Yeah, but
comparatively
HSBC
speaking,
it doesn't.
Yeah. So again, going back to the point, it was just to kind of discuss kind of how they've managed to find themselves in this same situation. So 9 years before that, HSBC received what you probably referring to as a 1.2 billion fine from the US regulator for significant AML failings. And the question is, 9 years on, how have they managed to find themselves in the same situation where they've had such significant AML failings to the point where the actual DFSA, the Dubai regulator, has said that these AML controls were unacceptable. You've had 9 years of being able to fix it, but somehow it hasn't worked.
What jurisdiction was the first fine? The 1.2 billion?
US, AML failings.
So then, to play devil's advocate, could it be that if the regulation is in its infancy and so new that it's not clear enough, and therefore members of HSBC could have misinterpreted what the rules are? Could it be that, as simple as that?
And so you could have argued that if you didn't really take stock of the detail of the failings. So the details of the failings included a lack of source of wealth and source of funds, scrutiny on high risk players, which is clients, clients, customers, which is kind of standard across any sort of jurisdiction when it comes to kind of AML.
No, but is it though? Because every jurisdiction is, and I agree with you, it's the basics in terms of integrity, but in terms of legal or regulatory requirements, that's definitely not standard. Look at Curacao in the gaming space, for example. Most businesses know that the regulations have a much higher threshold for when you would get source of wealth or source of funds in comparison to, say, the UK. So, yeah, I agree with you that obtaining source of wealth and source of funds information for high risk clientele is standard.
Yeah.
But standard is very different depending on the jurisdiction that you're in.
Yeah, and you can argue that in terms of different sectors, but I think when we talk about the financial services sector, I think that is very different to kind of a gambling, where there is a quite big nuance when it comes to regulation. I think because again, banks and institutions have to deal directly with one another. I think there's a bit more synergy when it comes to regulation in financial services.
Yeah, but then again, going across jurisdictions, and I don't know why I'm defending it, because I would prefer it to be like more strict. But there is no defined requirement for when you get source of wealth or source of funds from a client. It's based on risk, and your risk appetite can be much higher in Dubai than it is in, say, the US.
Yeah.
So again, to play devil's advocate, if the regulations are new and they're grey, then HSBC could just be the first one. There's always got to be someone that gets fined first, right? And they probably just the first ones. So then other businesses, other financial services providers like HSBC will learn from that and go, okay, so now we know we can't do that.
Yeah.
Let's push the boundaries a little bit more. And the next fine might be 5 million, for example. And they'll learn like it's an evolution, right? Like the FCA's first fines in the UK wouldn't have been, what was NatWest one, like, wouldn't have been
200 million,
it wouldn't have been that. It would have been £500,000. So I think maybe this is just the first one, and maybe in HSBC's defence, they just were either testing the waters, or I don't know anyone at HSBC by the way, or maybe they were just testing the waters, or it wasn't clear enough, or they were happy with it. Let's get a fine and see where the limits are, see where the boundaries are.
I mean, and it could be that they were willing to accept the risk of the fine. But I think, again, that was just, I mean, I touched on source of wealth, source of funds as the first point, but within that, there was also no checks conducted around PEP and sanction screening.
Okay.
So do you know what I mean? So okay, source of wealth, source of funds, we understand that that's a risk-based approach. We understand that risk appetite. We understand that there's, based on regulation, what source of wealth and source of funds looks like upon two different regulations might be very, very different. Some might be happy to accept the utilization of open source intelligence and verification of third-party checks as source of wealth or source of funds, whereas another regulatory environment or regulatory body will say, no, that has to be based on independent and verifiable sources of documentation. So yes, we get you.
Just said all that so fast. To anybody listening that's like, I want to pick up on what Ray just said there. So what are you getting at? Are you saying, is your understanding then that, or your belief that HSBC got fined 9 years ago?
Yeah.
Or 9 years prior to that one for significant AML failings, didn't take the lessons on board fully, and that's why they've got this second fine?
I think they did.
Okay.
I think they did take the lessons on board. I think that what's happened here is a disjointment or a fragmentation of the business. So this is what I'm trying to address in terms of having making really paying a lot of attention to actually ensuring that the learnings and the improvements and the controls align across the whole business, when you're in a multi international organization or global organization where you're working across different sectors. So what I think in my opinion, has happened here is that they've expanded into a new jurisdiction, expanded operations, but the standards or the learnings or the controls didn't move across with that. And I think that's something where you see a lot of organizations fall foul, is that they will have a main headquarters or a main license or a main establishment in terms of they've established their business in India, or they've established their business in Europe or in North America, and they've branched out to, let's say, South America or Africa, and then that same organization seems to fall foul of a regulation there because they haven't actually been able to transfer across the same standards of operations when it comes to their controls in there. So it might be teething issues. It might be, again, like you said, it might be them testing the waters, but also it might be just a lack of oversight in ensuring that those same level of controls have come across. Because if you look at some of the data that has come out, even the Financial Action Task Force 2024 annual report identified that 70% of jurisdictions assessed and reviewed had significant AML shortcomings in the AML frameworks. So it's like, no matter where you go, because you're going into potentially new territory, they're not understanding the actual law of the land or the landscape before they're going in. And I think that's where you're having
but
a bit of a...
They must understand it because they would have been granted a license to conduct business there. So they would have been granted their payments or investments or banking license in Dubai. To get that license, Dubai doesn't just hand that out willy-nilly.
Yeah.
They would have had to have demonstrated high levels of compliance. So, and that includes an understanding of the landscape.
Yeah, but high level of compliance on paper is very different to high level of compliance in operation.
Agreed.
And so when you're going into applying for a license to operate, you have to only evidence it on paper. Whereas when it comes to actually being audited or having to evidence it in operations, it's a very different reality. And I think that's where oftentimes what I think has happened here is that on paper they had great controls or they had a great process to implement, but they didn't actually get to go through with actually the implementation of those controls.
So to somebody listening then who is in an operation in the business that operates in multiple jurisdictions, either in financial services or gambling, whichever industry, because you've done this before. So how do you manage that then? You've been an MLRO in businesses where there are multiple jurisdictions under your remit. How do you manage that?
What I do is create an oversight framework. I create an oversight spreadsheet, for example, a group oversight spreadsheet for each specific market, and it will be covering the specific key areas of what needs to be reviewed to ensure that compliance is met when it comes to AML financial crime. That will go from the level of scrutiny or the strictness of the regulatory environment, the level of overview from the regulator, the requirements for key persons, whether there's language requirements, the level of resources, level of technical implementation needed. And again, that will then you have that. It's almost like a methodology, and then out of that you would then determine where you sit based on that. So I think what's happening is kind of a one size fits all. They have to say we're compliant in a lot of organizations say we're compliant in here, which is the most strict environment. Let's say US environment. We're compliant there, so obviously we're going to be compliant in here.
To use your own words against you, that sounds really good on paper.
Yeah,
like as if you're getting a license.
Yeah.
But how then do you do that in practicality? How do you ensure then? So if you've determined based on this spreadsheet that you've got a license in the UK and you've also got a license in Dubai, UK is stricter than Dubai. How do you test the effectiveness of those controls in Dubai?
Yeah. So again, there's a tone from the top. It must come from the top. So this is first discussed at board level. So this is just presented at board level and say this. this is where the board must understand where we are currently, and when we need to be. If we are where we need to be based on where we are currently, fantastic. If we are apart away from that, then it's about what needs to be done. So then it's then delegating out the responsibility for each element out to the respective areas of the business. So that's kind of how you're going to do. You're going to go from the top, get the buy-in from the board, and say, look, this is where we are. This
So
is
the buy-in to do what?
To ensure that we get from where we are, which is often when you enter the market, which is minimal compliance or base level compliance, to actually what we're going to do to ensure that we are not vulnerable to any of the key risks that we see in terms of non-compliance. And so then you kind of have to go through like a roadmap of kind of what you need to do in terms of whether it's just human resource, whether it's the competence of personnel, whether it is technical implementation, whether it is, again, just documented policies and procedures. All these things need to be scheduled in a roadmap kind of process, and then the relevant areas of business must take ownership of them. So that's what I do, and that's what I try to advocate for each area of the business. And sometimes it's difficult when you have multiple markets. And again, a lot of the time is organizations might look at and say, we are compliant in the most in our strictest market. We're compliant in the heaviest regulated market. Therefore, by default, we must be compliant elsewhere. And I think that's where you have to ensure that you don't kind of come a cropper to that kind of mindset. And so that's why I wanted to use this case study to kind of use it to see, actually, even though they've probably learned a lot from their 2012 failing, and they haven't repeated any failings in the US in their most strict market. However, in 9 years later, they've had a failing in a newer or lesser regulated environment. But even on top of that, the level of failing has been deemed to be unacceptable. So it's just kind of showing why it's important just to not lose sight of going through each specific market, each specific jurisdiction that you're in, and really determining, actually, are we compliant in there, and not using this kind of one size fits all the approach of we're looking down from our most heavily regulated jurisdiction and basing our compliance on that, because oftentimes you lose sight of actually those lines of operations translating into the new or other markets or other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think that's a good learning point, because, like you say, most of the companies we work with don't operate in singular jurisdictions, don't operate with singular licenses. So I think it is a important lesson for people to take away. So then to sum it up in practicality, do your gap analysis of each market or each jurisdiction.
Yeah.
From that gap analysis, get sign off from the board to make the changes you want to make and ensure good levels of compliance. And what's the next step after that?
Follow through. So create a roadmap to ensure that you're able to follow through and complete each action, or each relevant department takes ownership of completing those actions, to ensure that you're not assuming compliance, or you're not assuming that your operations are sufficient or controls are sufficient based on one singular jurisdiction, even if it's your most heavily regulated jurisdiction.
That's a good one. That's a good example. Good learning. So that HSBC one wraps up.
Yeah.
That was nice and quick.
Was it?
I thought it was going to go longer than that. That's nice. I think it's a really good example, and a good example for people to take things away from it. I know, I've worked in companies that have multiple jurisdictions, and more often than not, you're almost at times forced to apply a one-size-fits-all because of technical deficiencies. Like, it's easy for a company to say, well, we've already got this process in place for our customers that, ID verification takes place here and source of wealth checks take place here. Can we just apply that to Dubai? Yeah. And it's, then compliance, compliance's hand is almost forced in some circumstances to say, well, yeah, technically we can do that, but I would still prefer it to do the other way, where we're complying with those specific regulations. Because you always want to get the balance right. If you go with the one size fits all approach, you don't ever want to be too strict.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good lesson.
Yeah, because you come in, it's a double negative in that sense, and you become one size fits all. You become inflexible to actually being able to provide a better client and customer experience, because you might be over regulating, or you might be over strict, but then also you're not actually meeting the specific needs of the regulatory framework, because you're just basing it on a general theme of regulation that might be similar, but might not also be similar. Even if it is, again, like going back to what I said before, that it might be your most strict jurisdiction that you operate in, but still there's nuances where a really strict regulator might not have something that's specific to what a less strict regulator might require from you. It might say, for example, you must verify a customer within 30 days for a less strict regulation, but actually more strict regulation has loads of different other regulations, but doesn't have that one. And you fell on that little point there, where because you were focusing on all the other bigger points that maybe more strict regulator might have enforced or might have in place. So yeah, that was kind of the learning I got from that, and also what is a way to kind of try to mitigate that yourself or your organization be vulnerable to kind of those similar failures, especially for multi national organizations and global organizations that we work with, and most companies are in today, in this day and age.
Guys, thank you for continuing to support the Compliance Chronicles. Our followers continue to grow. The likes and shares on all of our content continues to grow. We really appreciate the support, but please continue to share it with your colleagues, your friends, so that we can reach more people and keep sharing our knowledge. That's a good one. I'm happy with that one.
And then we're going to cover something yourself that you wanted to go through in terms of a compliance case study, a bit more outside of kind of our general theme in terms of kind of regulatory compliance and kind of the financial and gaming and kind of corporate space. So I'm interested to hear what your kind of case study is about.
I was going to do the gambling one first.
But was you?
No, we'll do the other one first.
Okay.
So the other one is the Meta one. So, and the reason I picked this one was because it's quite a new one. Oh, I mean, when this comes out, I don't know, maybe it won't be new at the time, because Meta have obviously been fined before for something similar. So the reason I picked this one is because what it relates to is GDPR. And I'm not a GDPR expert and I don't ever claim to be. But in this day and age where data is used, accessed, manipulated to the extreme, especially now with the evolution of AI, I thought this was a good one and a pertinent one. And so the situation as it stands at the moment, so there's no enforcement action, there's no penalty. There's an investigation taking place at the moment from the Italian regulator, the AGCM, into Meta. And it's the fact that so you would have seen it on your phone. When you open WhatsApp now, you've got Meta AI. I don't know if you've seen it on there.
Yeah, you can search. Yeah, you can search inside of it. Yeah, right. I've seen it.
So the issue isn't the fact that Meta AI is there. The issue is the fact that you can go on there right now and you can type in, find me a restaurant within, 500 meters of where I currently am, or, give me the latest cinema showings at the cinema, a mile down the road. And it will give you information, but it's not doing it via a search engine, it's doing it via AI. And the issue that AGCM has with Meta, and where the investigation is going, is that they never asked for consent. So they never asked for consent they never asked customers for consent to access it. They didn't give them an opportunity to opt into it. It was just, it's there. Now you can start searching, but it's using their data, it's using their information. So that is what AGCM has an issue. And the reason I wanted to discuss it is because only, I think it's like 5 years ago, whatever it was, Meta got fined in Ireland for the GDPR breach, or the data breach, where they were sharing the data of EU customers to US. And that was a huge fine. It was like a couple of billion, I think, or like 2 billion, 1 billion.
2021, wasn't that? I think it was around a billion, don't quote me.
I'm sure I made a note of it. Sure, 1.2 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1.2 billion is what they received.
Same as it seems a theme that the US like to fine 1.2 billion, because that's the fine that HSBC received as well in 2012.
Do the calculations on how much is the Christmas party this year? That's a big Christmas party. But I thought it was a good one because I think with the evolution of AI and how many businesses are using AI, especially in the sectors that we work in, gambling and financial services particularly, there's a race to use AI or to evolve AI, and in particular with customer information, how customers interact with the user interface. Now, I was talking to an operator just a couple of weeks ago, and they've got a feature on their app which customers can interact with, which is AI, and nobody's looked at it from the perspective of GDPR to say is it from two aspects. From a GDPR aspect, to say that because you can go onto the chatbot and talk to AI before you've logged into your account, and then it can use that information later on and it's stored on there. Now, again, not being a GDPR expert, my advice to them was just question this, just test this, see if it is GDPR compliant. And then the second part to it was taking the customer's information from them and then recommending games or bets that they could place. Cool. But then my question to them was, is this not manipulating customers' betting behavior because they're using it? So, for example, customers, a sports betting customer, your AI recognizes the type of better that they are and it recommends a casino product. Is that not encouraging them to a more harmful level of gameplay? And, they hadn't questioned this. So that was why I thought it was a good subject, because I think it encourages people, especially in compliance, to question when a new service, product, technological solution is implemented.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because it's one of the most heavily scrutinized areas of the UKGC's AML guidance in terms of ensuring that as a business, when you have new technologies, new products, new services, that you're actually assessing the impact it has to your business, specifically when it comes to AML and CTF. How has this new technology, this new service, this new product impacted your risk, the business's risk when it comes to money laundering, terrorist financing? And oftentimes there's not enough evaluation and assessment and consideration placed on this by organizations. And I think just actually touching base on the National Risk Assessment, which came out recently, the new 2025 National Risk Assessment on money laundering, terrorist financing in the UK, it touches on both of those things. The importance of actually scrutinizing AI, because one of the typologies, one of the things that is identified is that the utilization of AI when it comes to perpetrating fraud and the financial crime offences has skyrocketed. And kind of it's one of our predictions we mentioned, which I think we need to do an episode on, and actually see how our predictions are getting on. We'll probably cover that in a future episode, but we covered that at the end of 2024, and it's come to fruition in this national risk assessment that actually AI is being utilised, and that is a technology. So if you're going to onboard an AI technology as a business, you have to think about actually the impact of that being misused or abused. And on top of that, you have to be looking at your risk assessment. So when it comes to the technology, you actually got to look at all products, all services that you are onboarding, and not only that, but actually the structures behind them, and giving greater scrutiny to actually the structures, the beneficial ownership, and all things around that. So it's really important that when you're onboarding, it's not just when you're utilizing these services, products, and games, it's not just onboarding. It's a continuous monitoring actually of how it's impacting and how you're quality assuring the level of service, and also quality assuring that there's no new risks that may be presenting themselves.
So a question for you then, and I think this, and I'm hoping people listen to this because I think it's a good question. I'm interested to see your response to it. What about technology that you haven't onboarded but that is publicly available? So, for example, I am an anti-money laundering officer, analyst within a gambling operator or within a bank. A customer's provided me a document. Can I upload that to an open AI form? Can I open it to DeepSeek, ChatGPT to scrutinize the statement or the document for the proof of address for me?
I would definitely not advise anything to be uploaded where there's sensitive information. Any personal information, any information that could identify the individual, any information that could give away any sort of relationships with other third parties, I wouldn't. What I would suggest is, if you are going to use anything or using AI to evaluate kind of documents, it's really to understand whether it is commensurate. So whether there's any sort of
you bringing up Ripper.
Yeah. So whether it's whether like so you look at a document, you look at let's say a bank statement, and you take some transactions, you redact them out so there's no personal information. You could ask your AI assistant agent, does this appear to be normal day-to-day activity? And maybe AI will be able to help you say, yeah, this looks like normal activity that it's seen on most bank statements, or not, if you're at kind of that analyst level. But in terms of, again, uploading documents, you have to be very, very careful. I would say that unless it's an in-house system where you have full control over the IP of that data and knowing where the data is going and stored, I wouldn't suggest uploading any sort of documentation that identifies any personal data.
So it's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Because I've got a follow-up question.
Okay.
Within risk assessments, like you said, they use the UK example or regulation. We're required to, when we onboard technology provider, to incorporate that into risk assessment. For me, that's the minimum, right? That's the bare minimum what operators or businesses should be doing. Don't you think that they should include within their risk assessment the use of external, not onboarded technological solutions, i.e. conduct a risk assessment or include in your risk assessment the use of AI that's not been onboarded? Because as we know, employees, the same as pretty much everybody in the world right now, uses AI for a lot. You know, I use AI instead of Google now. Like I won't go on Google something. I will go on to an open AI and ask a question. So do you not think that it's almost the obligation of operators and businesses to go a step further and not do the bare minimum of just, because the regulations say, oh, I've only got to do a risk assessment of what I've onboarded, but they should include in their risk assessment the use of technology.
But technically, it's still onboarding. If there should be processes and procedures in place in terms of what can be used, what can't be used. Because even, for example, the utilization of, let's say, LinkedIn, right? There's always an audit trail. So there's a risk to the business
that's not onboarding. That's just OSINT. That's just open source intelligence.
But also there needs to be protocols behind the utilization of open source. So the same way you're utilizing AI, let's say you're using a service which you haven't onboarded for a service level agreement, a contract, there should still be protocols in how you're using that. So definitely, I think there should be protocols in place. If you're gonna be using something, there should definitely be protocols in place.
But I do think a lot of companies, especially the ones I've spoken to, they have like an AI usage policy. They have an AI usage process which they give to staff. However, I don't understand how. No, I don't understand. For me, the way my mind works is everything starts with a risk assessment, and then you have a policy and a process. Yeah. So that is why I was getting back to: does it not just make more sense to now, not all technology, but include the use of external AI in your risk assessment?
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think I agree. I think
that was easy.
Yeah. You have one of the key risk pillars, right? When it comes to a risk assessment, you have your technologies, you have customers, you have geographical interface, product risk. So a product and technological risk is what you're talking about, and this has to be assessed. Anything that again is a new or for example, we've looked at the new risk assessment and we know actually there's an increased risk from this specific technology, that should definitely be within your risk assessment. And it makes sense, like you say, moving forward in a space where there's continuation of more technology, that before you use something, you should actually assess the impact, positive and negative of using that.
Yeah, because I think that's where we're going. I think it will become mandatory that risk assessments include technology that's not onboarded, just technology that's there for everyday use. Like, I don't know, we're going to get to the point where, you've got to do a risk assessment of how staff use Google. Mm-hmm. But I think because AI seems to, I think we've got to the point. I think if people do start to consider the use of AI within their risk assessments, use that to dictate the policy, use the policy to dictate the process, makes more sense.
For sure. So we kind of digress from your case study.
Because it all links together, because it's a learning point that the case study was the use and manipulation of AI, the fact that Meta used AI without consent. So that's why I asked the question, is because we've not asked customers their consent to upload their bank statements up onto a system. Am I okay in doing that? I mean, the answer is obviously no, but I wanted to get your take because I had this as a discussion with one gambling operator about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it was just, I was wondering, are other operators having these own internal discussions within their business? And then could they use this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know that some organizations and some firms working with are wanting to obviously push forward with the use of AI, right, to analyze um, trends on transaction monitoring, also documentation. But again, you have to risk assess actually what you can and not feed into the AI, right? So definitely risk assessing that needs to be at the forefront of anything that you then go and do afterwards. And again, it helps you to. It might feel front loaded and a bit onerous, but then it helps you prevent yourself falling foul of a meta situation where you have a comeuppance from what's happened, and it's only because did you really assess the impact and the risk prior to going to do that. And I think again with AI, the scrutiny is only going to get more the more it's being used, right? So we're having the EU AI Act, but again, there's going to be additional regulation coming. There's going to be additional requirements placed on it because again, new people will be using AI for more and more things. So yeah.
I had one. Did you have another? I've got another one.
Yeah, I think you had one which I think actually we kind of discussed off air a bit, and I think this is a really good one because again, it's whilst it's actually relevant, whilst it actually focuses on one of the kind of core industries that we work in a lot, the area of focus within that your case study is different to usual. So I'm actually interested to see how you discuss this.
So I picked this one because when we were discussing it, we said it'd be good because the majority of our listeners in the gambling industry, it'd be good to pick an example, a case study from the gambling industry. And I found it difficult to pick one because there are so many to choose from, but they're all quite similar. You know, anti-money laundering failings, safer gambling or social responsibility, depending on the year.
Consumer duty, wherever it may be.
Yeah, so they're all fairly common. But then there was one that was fairly recent where it all stemmed from a breach of terms and conditions. And I thought this was a good example because within compliance, it's such a broad spectrum of responsibilities that I think sometimes we can lose focus or not lose focus. We get tunnel vision on what is the highest risk, that by doing that, by default, the thing that was actually a lower risk to begin with because it fell off our radar has now heightened the risk. So I picked the example of, and I'm going to do their name a disjustice here, disservice. I think they're called Tai Chi Tech Limited, or if it's called like Fafabet. I don't know. I've never worked with them, but I'm sure it's Tai Chi Tech Limited. And the fine came from, there's a very small fine in the gambling industry. It's like 170,000, so not big. So again, this is why I think a lot of people didn't give it its due care and attention because it wasn't a huge fine when you compare it to like Entain and William Hills. But the penalty itself, whilst it was wrapped with AML and safer gambling failings, it came from a breach of terms and conditions and the Consumer Rights Act. And the cause of it was, they'd had written within their terms and conditions, and forgive me, I don't know the exact wording, but it was along the lines of, we have the right, we have at our own discretion, we can forfeit your winnings and close your account without justification. So it's like, so just when you hear that, that's like, okay, that's pretty bad to have that in your terms and conditions. But this is essentially what they had in their T's and C's, and they were exercising that right within their T's and C's. It led to customer complaints. And I'm reading between the lines here, but I imagine that's what started the assessment process from the UKGC, which then led to uncovering anti-money laundering and safer gambling failings. So again, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because an important lesson for us guys that are in compliance is that I always use that example, and I've said it to you before, of that waterbed effect, that waterbed compliance being like a waterbed full of holes. And essentially, we're always fighting that battle of trying to plug a hole. The moment you put pressure on one hole, the water spurts out somewhere else. And I think we are constantly in the focus, or have the focus of, right, we've got to get AML right, we've got to get safer gambling right, because that's where the water is mostly coming from. However, the moment we do that, if we don't have somebody or some way of monitoring terms and conditions, GDPR, consumer protection, whatever it is, if we don't have somebody monitoring that, those holes automatically open up again and start splurting out water. So it's very hard to get a very evenly balanced waterbed. And I thought it'd be an important lesson for people because, again, we done an audit of an operator, 3 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, and they hadn't reviewed their terms and conditions for well over a year. And so much had changed in legislation and regulation in that time that it was easy to find faults within their process because they hadn't updated it. So yeah, so I thought it was a good point, a good discussion.
No, it's good because I think more and more across regulation now, across jurisdictions, when we talk about compliance assessments, that means a full compliance assessment. Whereas in the past, it meant you would look at your AML, CTF compliance. We'll look at your safer gambling. We'll look at your consumer duty. We might look at your record keeping, training. But that's probably where it would stop. But now, compliance assessment means a full compliance assessment from governance and oversight through to terms and conditions, to your payouts and withdrawal policy procedures. We've seen again in the recent past quite a few firms essentially have to engage in a full compliance assessment simply because of how their withdrawal and payouts policies has caused complaints, and then those have led to scrutiny of what's going on there, and then a full compliance assessment takes place, and that's where the AML, and that's where the consumer duty, and that's where the safer gambling and other issues kind of come to head. But it's because, again, the actual payouts and withdrawal policies weren't taken enough due care of to ensure that actually they are complying with the regulatory requirement. So a compliance assessment now, today's age, means a full compliance assessment. It doesn't just mean your AML and safer gambling. It means your whole compliance requirements from technology through to your kind of payouts and withdrawals and everything in between, T's and C's, for example. So I think that's a big learning from this case study that you mentioned, is that they got fined, but it's because they lapsed in actually something outside of probably the two key areas of compliance.
And no one was really talking about, because the financial penalty was low in comparison to others, and because it wasn't like a tier one business, it almost fell under the radar, but people weren't giving it its due care. People weren't talking about it enough. There wasn't enough. Normally when there's a big financial penalty in from the FCA or UKGC or even the ICO, if there's a penalty, it's all over LinkedIn. But this one, there wasn't much chatter about it. And I think because the penalty was low, but it was such an important learning curve. So it leads to a question I was going to ask you is, if I'm a compliance professional I'm in a bit of financial services or gambling operation, how do I get that balance right? I've got problems with my AML team. I've got problems with my safer gambling team. I've also got problems that, I think my DPO is not competent enough. So I'm trying to look at GDPR. How do you get that balance right? Is there a trick to getting it right?
There is no silver bullet to getting it right. I think it's being able to go back to that kind of leadership episode we've previously done, and really getting everybody within the department or within those key areas to understand what success looks like. So getting those people to understand what success looks like and making sure it aligns to what your idea of success looks like, to ensure that the outcomes match what the vision is. So that's what I think that's the only real way. Once people kind of are able to understand what success looks like and a match and align, you can kind of steer that ship a bit easier. But if your DPO, for example, you're having concerns around competence, then it's really important as your leader to be able to present those in a way that allows them to have opportunity to recognize where that is, but also to have the scope to not feel judged and actually try to work on those areas. So it goes back to that twofold of like alignment and leadership.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the same. Like for me, when you're in a senior role in compliance, you need a good team around you. Like you can't. There is no value in being good at your job. You've got to make sure and help the others around you be good at their jobs as well.
I heard a saying after that episode, and we did recently about compliance, and it's really I think this is a really good quote. It was that they were saying was bad leaders hire people so they can tell them what to do. Good leaders hire people so they can tell them what to do. So a good leader will hire people that can tell them what to do, and then you can lead them to go do that. Whereas a bad leader will hire people they can dictate what they do. You should be really hiring people to tell you what to do.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. Like I think I would look at the teams I've managed in the last 5 years, and I've tried my best to surround myself by really good, competent people to tell me what's going wrong. Like, because I don't see everything. And I think I've been quite fortunate with that. And I think we both do that. Quite typically when we're hiring people, it's like, well, I need to know that. The thing is, I find a lot of people are really, really good. They have tons of knowledge, but it might take them a while to have the confidence to speak up and come and say, look, you know, I found something. I found a problem.
Yeah.
That comes a bit later. So, yeah, I think we're almost crossing back over to the leadership episode. But I do think, I would say that is almost a silver bullet in terms of if you want to get a balance right of good compliance across the board, don't try and do it yourself. Enable people around you to help you to do it. I think that is almost like a silver bullet, because if you can get that right, which not many people do, you're onto a winner.
Yeah. I think we ran out of time. I wanted to go through something else, but I'm conscious of the time, and we kind of have to go and give our kind of like our takeaways from the episode. So I think it might be an opportunity for us to kind of do a second part case study, because I think case studies are so important, and kind of taking away learnings of case studies. So even if it means that we come back at a later date to kind of
bring a guest on that's gone through something that we can learn from, and we can grill them a little bit. I think
case study. A lived case study. Maybe a lived case.
Good. I think I learn a lot from those. So hopefully other people will.
Yeah. So what would you kind of say to anybody listening as a kind of a takeaway when it comes to what we discussed today around looking at case studies and taking learnings out of case studies? What would kind of be your kind of takeaway?
So my takeaway to give to people.
Yes. Cool.
Okay. So I would say that the number one case study is share the information. For me, what I like to do is share the information with the people within your business and ask them to come back to you with what they've taken from it. Because a group of 10 people will come back to you with more information and more feedback in terms of, oh, we need to do this in the business, we need to do that in the business. It'll be much more valuable than what I would spot. I might spot one or two things and say, guys, right, I've just seen this enforcement action. We need to make sure our risk assessment's up to date. We need to make sure our terms and conditions are up to date. But between those other 10 people, one of them will say, Alex, our safer gambling policy's not been updated in 3 months and it's due a review. Alex, I can't remember the last time the cookies policy was checked. Yeah. So I would say get the information, share it with your teams, and ask them to come back to you. Not out of laziness, but purely out of having more eyes on it, and ask them to come back to you with, let's share a gap analysis as a team and do it that way.
Yeah, really good. I concur, and I think just going on.
I was going to ask you your one.
Yeah, so
you can't just concur. You got to give me something else.
No, so just kind of following on from that, I think using case studies to build engagement, using case studies to provide development opportunities. That's what I think is really, really important in case studies. It gives an opportunity for you to then provide development opportunities for people within your department or even outside of the business. Like, so when you share it, it's not only people within the specific compliance department, it's business wide. You need to be sharing this business wide, and then it gives opportunities again for people outside of the department to engage with compliance.
A really good point, sorry to interrupt, there's a really good point that I missed, is that when you do share case studies with the wider business outside of compliance, not to scaremonger, but sometimes it has the effect of getting home the point of why you do what you do. So for example, a marketing team, they'll send you an idea and say, Ray, look, I've just got this idea for a marketing campaign. What do you think? Is it compliant? And you'll say, no, it's not. And you might give them a reason, but they don't fully understand, not always, they don't always understand why you're saying no, even though you've said, look, it's a breach of this. But when you share with them enforcement action and you can say, look, that campaign you wanted to do last week where you had that, person with a winning lottery ticket buying a Ferrari and, whatever it was, the reason I said no was, look at this, so-and-so just got fined. So I think it's a really good point. If you share it with the wider business, it sometimes helps them understand why compliance says no sometimes. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good.
Wrapped it up. That was nice.
Perfect.
And easy. That was quick. That was good.
I mean, we didn't even get to go through everything we wanted to, but that was really good.
We'll do the follow-up episode with a guest and get a live case study. So do you want to do your usual goodbye, thank you? You getting into the rap mode?
Getting in the rap mode. No, look, guys, again, we thank you for engaging with us. We are continuously seeing more and more followers, more and more engagement across our platforms. So we're continue to be really, really, really delighted with that. Again, what we'll ask you to do is continue to like, comment, subscribe, and turn your notification bells on, and continue to engage so you can be part of what we discuss on future episodes.